Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Know the Rules of the Game podcast. I'm Desiree Patno. I'm your host. I am the CEO and the president of Women in the Housing Real Estate Ecosystem. We're here to bring you breaking news of what's happening for the Know the Rules of the Game. And today, this is incredible. It's something very passionate, something that happened to me personally also. It's about elder financial abuse, what that's like, where we're going to take some really deep dive into some very heavy questions. So first and foremost, a little bit about myself. Again, I'm the CEO and president of Women in Housing Real Estate Ecosystem. We call it NAWRB for short. I own my own real estate brokerage, Desiree Patno Enterprises, for the last 30 years, advisor, investor for Amicus Brain for AI for aging population. I'm also the chief strategic officer for Zulu Time, which is a holistic transitional center for veterans. And I'm also the publisher and a speaker nationwide for a network of wealth of knowledge across a vast economic footprint. Hence, NAWRB is what its core is. So again, welcome to Know the Rules of the Game for elder financial abuse. And today our guest is going to be Philip, and if I could have Philip's last name, it was really nice of me to have it right. We're on Philip Marshall. He is an incredible person. We've had the honor of being able to interview him and have an article, I want to say, was it Philip, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken?
Yep.
Right. And he is his grandmother, a very famous lady, Brooke Astor, was a victim of elder abuse by her son, Philip's father. So you can imagine the integration of the integral part of this is that 90% of elder financial abuse happens by a family member. And he is a prime example of what's going on. And the fact that he's bringing to the forefront has been in the space for how many years now? Have you been working on this?
I've been about 10 years.
Yeah.
Over, yeah. So.
Very heavy stuff. So let me give you a little bit of background about him and his legacy and where he's been. He helps a greater cause of elder justice through advocacy, training, select projects, and fostering multidisciplinary partnerships. After the elder financial abuse happened in 2006, he sought for a petition for guardianship, which was awarded for his grandmother. She is a New York City philanthropist who was a victim of it during the time. And he has chronologically chronologized all the national press due to her recognition of what has been going on through her life. And the deep legacy is twofold. First, how her sad circumstances have spurred a greater recognition of elder abuse. And second, as an active elder for almost half a century, how Mrs. Astor's life amplifies ways our last decades could be so purposeful and filled with philanthropy and engaged love of humanity. And I really love that, because if you really look at the correlation of what we're doing with humanity right now, how we've lost touch with human contact because of technology and because of a siloed of emphasizing of data overload, I like to call it. What you're doing cannot be underestimated, how much hard work you have to go into it. So thank you for being on board with us today.
You're welcome, Desiree. Thank you for having me, both as an elder justice advocate and as a victim.
Yeah, I mean, and here you are, been a professor. You recently retired for 3 decades at the Roger Williams University as you served as director and professor of historic preservation. That had to be very interesting. So that goes right into, tell me something unique and unusual about you that we'd like to have our listeners listen to.
Well, Desiree, most people think I spent my time, growing up in New York, but I explore. And by that, I explore far beyond the confines of New York City's upper crust, Upper East Side, which most people sort of associate my family with. Before I acted, said my grandmother, few people knew I was the grandson of a famous philanthropist. And as far as I'm concerned, that was just fine, because I could live on my own terms. But this changed fast. The day front page headlines read, "Disaster for Mrs. Astor." Now I lead with it, with my grandmother being Brooke Astor. And it helps the cause and it honors her legacy. But it comes at a cost. Save a few years. I didn't grow up in New York, but in Vermont, 200 miles and like a world apart from New York. What I inherited from my grandmother and treasure most is her love of the outdoors, which she gained each weekend in her country house And during the summer, hiking up mountains in Maine, well into her 90s. When not at home, she'd explore distant domains. So spurred, I do too. And to help, I have a wander list for my wanderlust.
I love it. Wanderlust or a wanderlust.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Well, but see, you're bringing back that element of being real, of being authentic, of being involved in the environment. We can talk about climate change. Obviously, that's another topic, another podcast, but you're involved in the truism of, I believe, of humanitarian and humanity itself, of interconnecting, of living life, right?
Totally.
And for that, you're bringing it to, as you say, used to be put it at the end of your paragraph, and now you put it at the beginning of your introduction. Because so many people say, well, you're just dropping names and you're just being, in the forefront of look at me, look at me. Unfortunately, today's society that we have gotten to the point to where if you don't get someone's attention with the first 5 seconds, they lose you.
Right.
You lose them. And so the idea, though, is I really believe in the work that you're doing and the work that we're doing as a cohesive and a collaboration. We're really addressing what I think is one of the most important issues, is that how we are brought into this world is the same way we should dignify our exit of this world, the quality of life, and not take advantage of our loved ones. And when you have 90% are the ones who are doing it, is it greed, or does it feel that you've outlived your usefulness, and all those kind of things? So it's a really sad state of affair that we have to come down to having advocates or champions for this cause, but it's a reality. We're talking, last report was 36 billion. I heard $50 billion and up, and that's only one of 44 cases are being reported. I mean, think about that. 1 of 44 cases being reported, $36 billion on the table. That equates to how many, trillions? We're getting some serious numbers here. So with that being said, let's talk with some of the ideas of how can we address this. So let's give everyone a little bit of a framework. Talk about, let's in a few minutes, explain your grandmother's story, where she was in her life, and kind of a narrative background so they can give some really quantitative information about where we sit.
Well, for basically what happened was my grandmother was Brooke Astor only for the last half of her century-long life. And she had married Vincent Astor in 1953, the year I was born. And then Vincent died in 1959. And before that, in 1947, he'd set up the Vincent Astor Foundation for the alleviation of human suffering. And the Astor money had been made by John Jacob Astor. Everybody associates John Jacob Astor with sort of the fur trade. But the reality is most of his money was made in New York on real estate. So the Astor Foundation generally focused on New York City. And so Vincent Astor dies, and the all-male board of the Vincent Astor Foundation look toward my grandmother and say, oh, Mrs. Astor, now you can go to Baden-Baden and soak in the water or something. She goes, no, I'm going to become president of the foundation and steward it, respecting the life and legacy of her husband. And so she did that, and from the age, I think, 59 to 95 when she closed the foundation. And so all of her work in philanthropy was achieved while she was an elder.
Okay, that's 35 years.
That is, it's 35. And so, it was basically decades of this work that she was doing as an elder, pretty much both giving to the New York City Crown Jewels, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the New York Public Library and other institutions. But her favorite projects were those in communities, up in Harlem, or just scattered in the boroughs, and where the Astor Foundation would not just give money through its due diligence, because my grandmother, as president, would visit every site and talk with folks before they awarded a grant. So it was sort of the Astor seal of approval. And if the Astor Foundation gave money, then it's like it was so much easier to use that as seed money to garner future involvement and investment. And it worked. And those efforts are sustained today in New York and also in Maine, where she spent her summers.
That's fantastic. So we're talking to close that out. We're talking what, like $100 million, if I remember correctly, was the.
I think it was like a bit under 200 million, and I don't know how that works out in dollars today, but it was millions. And what my interest is, because she really, so much of it was seed money. I think in the end she gave endowment to the big sort of cultural jewels, but the seed money would garner people these days talk about 10x or 100x, right. But there was a lot of 10x at that point. And I'd love to do the math on how the Astor Foundation sort of provided a catalyst. But it was millions.
Wow. Wow. So here she spends 35 years of her life doing the most incredible work for taking care of areas that needed so much love. And she personally inspected, gave it, like you said, the Astor seal of approval, goes out there, dedicates her life to it, lives to a ripe age of 95. And then from there, takes on, I love the part where you said all male board. All
male board,
no,
exactly.
Right, that was right, perfect timing. Hello. Takes on an all male board and then does this work. And then all of a sudden, what happens after she passes away? Then what goes down?
Well, what happened? She closed the foundation when she was 95.
Right.
Then she actually died when she was 105. But, for example, it was time to close the foundation at 95. I think everybody agrees on that. Sort of the biggest last really public event, it wasn't really public, but event, was David Rockefeller, who was pretty much her closest friend at that point, gave a birthday party on her 100th birthday for 100 people up in Westchester, in the Rockefeller estate up in Westchester County. Mm-hmm. And then she left the limelight until my petition for guardianship. And then, and that's where the press found my petition, which was been sealed. And that was where the next day there were those front page headlines reading disaster for Mrs. Astor. My grandmother would never, ever want to be known as one of America's greatest or most famous victims of elder abuse. Nor did she, while in the throes of dementia, choose to be victimized, deprived, manipulated, and robbed by her only child.
That's okay. So yeah, it's an incredible, heartfelt story. And we will be happy to post it as part of our link to go to it. We wrote, with your help, Philip, an incredible article that really details the whole story of your incredible grandmother.
Right.
And the reason is that the tie into this, and that's why we follow up and ask you to be on here, because we could talk about my story, elder financial abuse, but it's not that I was an elder at the time, but close enough, and to deal with what's going on. And it can happen in so many different forms and shapes. And I really hit the banking industry about how they own your money versus then, where you have to prove it's your money to take out of the bank. It's a whole nother podcast. Mm-hmm. But the idea is that I really wanted to amplify that we can work our entire life so hard, and whether we're a single mother, whether we have 5 cents to rub between our fingers, or 50 million or 5 billion to rub between our fingers, that everyone's a victim, and everyone has the opportunity to become victimized in some capacity. That there's no one who's not can't be part of it. And so with that being said, let's take some deep dive into these questions. what should one do if they suspect elder abuse, in the sense that, let's go back to, I might go back to another question. I would like to first.
Were you thinking, were you thinking about the rules or?
Yeah, I want to first apply to the rule, which is the rule is to change the rules. I really, when we went back through these questions, let's talk about that first rule. Change the rules. How? What? Where do we start?
Desiree, thanks for sparking me on this, because you said, like, what are your 3 rules? And I'm sitting there going, okay, and I'm really dwelling on rules. I go, wait a minute, we've got to change the rules, because to begin with, our greatest impediment to elder justice is ageism. Today, our social norms, or if you will, our social rules, normalize ageism. But when we short seniors, we short society and ourselves, and we need to change these rules. And because we've got to change how the rules feed society's explicit and implicit biases against older adults and against our future self. So to end ageism, we start with engageism, fostered by community concern, also capacity and connections. And we can do this in a couple ways. As older adults, we need to engage more. We need to pay it forward while society can help pay it back in the spirit of reciprocity. And also, we can all engage, especially in difficult conversations, especially with older adults and those in their circle of support. Today, a good place to start is by looking at, for example, the Conversation Project, which you can easily Google. Mm-hmm. As an aside, our efforts to help my grandmother all started with making sure we respected her wish to spend her last days in her country house, which had been shuttered by my father to save money. Earlier, my grandmother had gifted my father her summer house in Maine. Mm-hmm. And then ownership was immediately transferred to my father's 3rd wife, who started remodeling it. My grandmother never returned to Maine, And then I heard about this from my grandmother's staff, and I thought, as Maine goes, so goes the estate. Well, that was back in early 2000s. And back in 2018, I returned to Maine, 3 blocks from my grandmother's former house, to give a talk on elder justice. I wasn't running from, I was running to. And the title of my talk was, As Maine Goes, So Goes the Nation. And this is a reference to Maine's reputation as a bellwether for presidential elections. Not sure it'll work this time. But I went and said, look, Maine is taking a leadership position protecting older adults' net worth, self-worth, and lives. And during that time, there was a question after my talk, there was a question from the audience. It's like, well, what can we do? And a staffer from Senator Collins' office, who after the talk told me that she was going to introduce an act I had been trying to get in. But the staffer from the Special Committee on Aging, the Senate Special Committee, piped in and said, look, we should do just what we're doing now. We're having conversations, in that case, at a talk. Now, through your podcast, we have conversations, then we act. And that's exactly what you're doing through these podcasts.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's, it just heartfelt when you said that, gave it to his 3rd wife, her home that she wanted to live in, and she made all this money in the one place that she wanted to exit and have her quote quality or QOL, I call it, for quality of life, was taken away from her. And if you think about it, and I love another phrase you came up with, ageism and engagement, and ageism with engageism, can't even say it. And if you think about Alzheimer's, dementia, isolation, the number one thing we have going right now, and it doesn't have to be an aging thing, it can be isolation. That the statistic I heard, I believe we broke the two-person rule, that it used to be 4 friends, and it's less than 2 friends now that are our quote real friends that will be there in time of disastrous need, whether you get sick in the hospital. Here we are having coronavirus is something that could be out there. That, you know, it's now become a guarantee that we're going to more or less have it in the United States, to where you have to be very careful about it. So who's going to be there for you when you're in the hospital? You know, the old adage that used to be, you know, who's going to take a bullet from you? Now I don't want to say that anymore, just because of our generation. It was a common cliche word, but now I'm like, no, we don't need to say that. Times have changed, right? So I'd like to say it's sad that we no longer have the time to engage. Guilty as charged myself. And I'm trying to, one of the things that I've done and to help this environment is I adopted 3 puppies to get me to be more, make myself make the time to be engaging. You know, granted, it's not with a human, it's with my girls, because I have 4 adult boys, but my furry girls force me to, hey, look at me, take time with me. And that gets you into the breaking of the cycle of being a workaholic, that you spend quality time with those things or people that you love, things being my pets. I call them my furry girls. So important to change the rules in that capacity to make sure that we have those on the table. Now, from a local standpoint, you know, we're talking about change rules. What is one little deeper dive into that first rule that you've been able to overcome, or something that you've been able to be working on that's getting close that could be changing? Is there anything that we could highlight real quickly?
Well, I think, I mean, basically keeping in mind kind of the engageism, you know, it's interesting because at this point, I take weekends off from elder justice. And you know, what does all that mean? It's like I too, you know, I get the impression as though you're working a lot, and at this point you have many hats. But you know, taking care of ourselves in an ageless way is really important. And I think that idea of sort of when I do it, it's like, okay, not only do I have to help advance elder justice, but personally, I need to engage and practice what I either teach or preach. And I think it really sparks to what we were talking about offline, but you know, before we went live, is that we can have the conversations, but unless we actualize what our intentions are, it's going to be really hollow. And so, you know, I'm changing the rules really personally first, and being active in this way, as well as trying to do it through the elder justice activities at hand.
Right. Well, to answer your question about myself, I do wear many hats. I'm just born that way, but I did make a conscious effort in 2019 that the body is not as young as it used to be, and if you don't take care of the body and mind, it's not going to get there. So you can tell the difference when I've taken my vitamins and not taken my vitamins, and when I've become energized and not energized, because the brain flow just becomes, okay, her EQ is going where? So yes.
Right.
So I'm being real, I'm being honest. And as we get older, you know, the old adage is, oh, you need less sleep. No, you still need as much sleep, but what you do need is that your body doesn't produce as much as it should of various different, you know, whether it be hormones or enzymes, or to process food, or whatever you want to call it. And whatever that is, you've got to be your best doctor. You got to be your best judge of yourself, because the only person who knows you as good as you is you.
Right.
And that, again, another podcast, but that's why I think it's so important that in the elder financial abuse arena, that we have to have our blinders open. We have to have our vision be in the pocket. And so we're not so siloed effect. And that's where I think the rule changes. That's because it just has been done this way. Doesn't mean we continue to do it this way.
Right.
So thank you. So our second rule that you came up with is practice upstandership. What is upstandership?
Well, now that you ask, okay, what happens is no one's heard of upstandership. And upstandership is about standing up to injustice. But what happened with me is, this is all new to me. You know, I was a historic preservationist for, 3 decades, for 4 decades in some. And first of all, fortunately, historic preservation and elder justice are somewhat similar, because both respect and protect the ageless value of that which is old, but may be discounted, sometimes until it's too late. But I'm sitting there and I'm thinking about this, not as a preservationist, but I'm thinking about, how do we stand up to injustice? Pretty much self-identified as a citizen sociologist, having never taken a course in sociology or psychology, which are fundamental to understanding social justice. So, but to address this elder justice, I feel it's necessary to kind of step it up and see what social justice models existed that would help. So I looked into bystander intervention, for example, but it didn't work for me, because bystander intervention means somebody standing by and they happen to intervene. And I felt there needed to be a model which realized our social compact between society and self, and those are equal. And if we were elsewhere in the world, maybe we use a different construct, but society and self both individually need to be strengthened so they can sort of, in a kind of sense of hybrid vigor, strengthen each other. But none of these models I was looking at in terms of bystander intervention and stuff worked for me. So I said, okay, I'm going to develop something. I'm going to call it upstandership. And it has this social compact. And what it boils down to, and it really segues really well into some other front burner stuff that I'm doing, which has to do with each of us being a concerned person who practices upstandership. And just stepping aside, you can go, well, sure, I want to be an upstander. It's like, no, nobody's an upstander. They're practicing upstandership daily. And I'm going to get to the granular stuff in a minute, but we're not just self-designated something or identified. It's a practice like anything. And so what happens with concerned persons are basically non-abusing family, friends, and neighbors who serve as informal network supporters. Here, in this case, for older adults who are vulnerable to or suffering from harm. As concerned persons, we act, but we need to know society has our back. We need to know that our personal responsibility to act must match and mesh with society's quote unquote response ability or ability to respond. Otherwise, we're going to be helpless and hopeless. So I see my job is to do two things: to empower people to stand up to injustice, to practice upstandership, in this case, having to do with elder justice, while personally working with experts, those who both serve and save seniors within a community context, even up to the federal level, and with people in their circles of support, both formal and informal.
I love your play on words. It's unbelievable. I love
well, thank you, Desiree.
You frame them. I know. I'm waiting for the song to go woo woo woo.
All right.
I mean, and I'm just sitting here rocking over here. I mean, it's sad, but I mean, I'm getting adjusted. I'm one of these people that always find a glass full, never empty. And they were like, you can never be full. And I said, I'm sorry, it's always full, because it's matter what it's full of, air or fluids or solids. It doesn't matter, but it's always full of something.
Right. Right. Oh, see, because I'm a Buddhist, I say it's always empty. And people go, oh, that sounds bad. I go, it's empty of its own existence. So it's completely interdependent with everything else. But it can either be a completely full or completely empty, but this half full, half empty is a mixed results.
I love it. Well, and everything you just said about the upstandership is really about, we just released our 10 leadership principles from the NDLC group that I'm the chairwoman of. And number 6 of the principles is this: Speak out. Unconscious bias is present, but ignoring it only perpetuates it. Take a stand and speak out. And that's exactly what you're saying in a different way.
That's it.
That's it.
That's it. It's so good. I look forward to seeing the other. Thank you for thank you for the peak. I look forward to the other ones.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, the idea is that, you know, believe whatever the mind can conceive, it can achieve. Right?
Right.
These
Right.
are things that are so powerful that when you think about the ideas of the parity and information that the elder need to have, you know, whether we apply it to the principles of women, these principles can be applied to anything. They can be applied to the aging population or the elder. They can be applied to veterans. They can apply to minorities, you name it. Economic, social impact, the idea is that, you know, we have the keep achieving. Effective leaders always keep learning. There's always something to learn and improve upon. So your first rule is what? Change the rules. So rules were meant to be evolving, not to be standard for the rest of our lives.
Totally. Especially given, you know, kind of the way we now have so many added decades to which have sort of to our lives. I mean, in the last century, that we really need to redefine this in so many ways. I think the whole thing with upstandership and with social justice is, I think it's really important to realize that social justice, or excuse me, elder justice is in its infancy compared to other realms that define our social, legal, and moral obligations. But justice isn't just about one cause or just another. It's inclusive and embracing. And just to paraphrase, I'm sorry to bring in Hegel, but paraphrase Hegel is that the issue is not between good and evil, but between goods each trying to make too exclusive a claim. And what happens here is there is a reason, which we don't need to go now, briefly mention, that elder justice, it's kind of, I feel is really important to test drive elder justice through various arenas, including elder justice, because what elder justice ultimately is it's not just about older adults. Elder justice is about our future self every day along the way.
No, you're so point on. And I'd like to highlight some of the data that's going to help reiterate the information we're talking about. And again, thank you very much for Philip for being on the call. So if you look at, and you can purchase these online, our 2019 Women in Housing Ecosystem Report, we call it the WEIR report. We have a volume on elder financial abuse. On page 83, it starts. But one of the things is that elder abuse is a worldwide and often silent issue affecting the older population in various forms, including financial, physical, psychological, and sexual abuse and neglect. And some of the statistics that are mind-blowing is older women are almost twice as likely to be victims of financial abuse compared to older men. 14.1% of adults aged 60 and older in the United States have experienced some kind of physical, psychological, sexual abuse, potential neglect, or financial exploitation in the past year. So, and this is data from, like I said, from 2019 and 2020, where it's going to be updated and available for purchase at Q2 of this year. So you've got about 4.5 months left to get it out there. But one of the things that's so incredible, and I'd like to recite this, is that your grandmother was running this incredible foundation till the age of 95. And a lot of people say, well, at a certain age, you start losing your credibility. And how do you, I mean, look at Warren Buffett, you know, he's how old and running, you know, really? When is he going to not have all his facilities together? When are we going to do it? How come people live into 105, 119, I think is, you know, the oldest that we've ever had. And what's amazing is I found a report on 2018. It's called this: cognitive decline is a key factor that makes the aging population susceptible to elder financial exploitation. And this is according to the Elder Financial Exploitation Report by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, of the investor advocate. The aging brain is marked by a decline in fluid intelligence, while crystallized intelligence usually remains intact or increases. So what is fluid intelligence? In financial terms, the report refers to the ability to manipulate and transform financial data. And it's generally associated with the capacity to hold multiple distinct pieces of information in one's mind. Crystallized intelligence, in contrast, refers to a person's store of knowledge and involves knowledge and experiences with financial products. With a decline in fluid intelligence, older adults are likely to experience a decreased ability to manage money and make financial decisions. However, their decline might be offset by greater financial knowledge and experience from increased crystallized intelligence. So the idea is that here your grandmother is a perfect example that her financial knowledge allowed her to run this till the age of 95. And she says, all right, I'm done. I'm tired. I'm returning. I'm closing down shop because I've maxed that out. Where the fluid intelligence, where it's like, let me put this in layman terms, you walk down a alley and you know walking down that alley because you've done it 1,000 times, but you don't remember that if you walk down at night, it might not be as safe as walking down it during the day. So you remember that you're familiar with it, you're not going to get lost, everything's fine. But you would know better that not to do it at night, especially as a woman, than during the day, because it might not be the best environment, knowing, that they could rob you. So that's where we lose our fluid intelligence. Not that we remember our rules and regs and we understand complexity of issues. We keep and grow that because that's our crystallized intelligence. Hence it sounds so good. I know mathematically A plus B equals C, but you gave me A plus B equals D and I can double my money. So yeah, sign me up. Hence the financial fraud, because we know mathematically that makes sense. Let's do it. But we don't know the scam is on the back end because the fluid intelligence doesn't put up the alert antennas and say, hey, this is a scam. Don't do it. Right?
Right.
So
yeah. But I think, what's really sad is really when it comes down to it, as we age, our wherewithal in terms of finances is really one of the first things to go, as you so well described. And that's the downside. The upside is that we know that. And I'm working really closely with the financial industry because, as I mentioned in the context of Maine, the financial industry, and this is where Maine comes in with Senator Collins' Senior Safe Act that started in Maine as an initiative, and within about 3 or 4 years is now was congressionally approved 2 years ago, which helps. The Senior Safe Act basically says that if a financial industry representatives have been trained and they have reasonable suspicion to believe that there's alleged or actual exploitation, they can report and refer without being administratively or civilly liable. Which everybody goes, oh, we're going to be liable, we can't report. It's like, no, that's off the table now. And what happened with me, with my grandmother, it's like, I'm trying to help her. And it took me a few years. I'm desperately trying to figure out what to do. And I'm talking to all these trusted people. And I talked to a sage haiku friend whose family had been through similar circumstances. And he said, Philip, follow your heart first, then follow the money. At that point, I had kind of discounted the money. And the reality is that is what was detectable and evidential. And what's really, don't get me going on this, but briefly, when we got immediate temporary guardianship of my grandmother, And after a grueling ordeal that did not go, that was settled out of court, we got temporary in July of '06. By October of '06, we got permanent guardianship. But the guardianship judge said, based on the Court of Evaluators report, that, quote unquote, elder abuse was not substantiated.
Oh my God.
So all of a sudden, we had a Pyrrhic victory. We had saved my grandmother, but we were losing the war on elder justice. It was almost like elder justice's Plessy v. Ferguson, and it was going to set back elder justice, and then sort of, it was going to kind of be open season on seniors. At that point, the same month that the guardianship judge said that, the Manhattan District Attorney started investigating, and to make a long story short, a few years later, there was a 6-month criminal trial of my father. And, what happened is that one clause of elder justice is not substantiated leapt us from case to cause. We were concerned about my grandmother. And then we realized this is way, way bigger than my grandmother, and that this was abuse and it needed to be addressed as abuse. And if it hadn't been for, I'd really remain forever grateful to the Manhattan District Attorney who took on this case, but allowed a lot of us from going from taking a stand and helping my grandmother to taking the stand in criminal court for the greater cause of elder justice. And what worked on this case was there's a lot of evidence through a 6-month criminal trial that obviously the financials informed the case and the decision and the verdicts.
It's heartbreaking because basically, be thankful you got your grandma, but you don't get her. It's unbelievable. And to validate this, even to go on further, your grandmother was obviously on the other end of the spectrum, but a higher percentage of older women are in poverty than older men by 11 to 7%. So if we flip the tables, they wouldn't have the wherewithal to go to court to fight this out. They're already on the street, right? And women are the ones who live men. So your whole capacity for the fight of the fight, you won the war on getting her back and having control and guardianship of her, but you lost all the resources to take care of her through the fact that she's outlived her usefulness. So I'm going to take care of the money because it's my turn to be on the totem pole. And that's where we become a real sad state of affairs, and it has to come to the forefront. So it brings us to our third question, our third rule, I should say. Develop and manage a longevity plan. So explain to that in depth so we can really address it to a better playground.
Well, what happens is we're talking about public health a lot these days, but the public health triumph of the 20th century gained us 30 years added to our lives. And really, to fully benefit from this longevity dividend, we need to recognize that these last new decades are not discounted, but advanced with a degree of planning that we never even thought was needed. Let's say 60 plus years ago when Social Security came in, or when all these other things were happening. And so really, one thing I'm writing right now is like the top 4 items you should do on your bucket list first. Everybody's got these bucket lists. It's like, I want to do this, I want to do that. Well, the top 3 or 4, depending on how you cut it, is really to have this longevity plan. And you don't need to be a boomer to think about this. You can be a millennial. Everybody needs a healthcare or advanced directive or a healthcare proxy. Any adult, anybody over 18. And there's so many people, when people call me, and I have a helpline, it's not a formal one, it would be my cell phone, this phone. But when people call me about the nuances of, basically, what happens. A daughter is going to be calling me because their brother has completely isolated their mother and or father and is stripping them of everything. And so what happens here is, even before we go into details, I say, well, does, for example, your mother who holds healthcare proxy? Who holds, and then to go down the list, who holds, is there a power of attorney? And who holds power of attorney? And so the longevity plan would include having an advance directive or healthcare proxy, having a power of attorney. And both of these, along with all these others, involve trust. Basically, elder abuse is the betrayal of trust, and elder justice is, I used to say, the provision of trust, but that doesn't work. Elder justice is the promise of trust. It's that term promise underscores its relevancy and is forward-looking, because like any promise is forward-looking, and it's not just a one-time event. So the promise of trust through advance directive, through power of attorney, and of course, a will. And just having that and making sure that somebody who holds the POA and advance directive and will is somebody who is trustworthy, and in some cases you might want to have two people. So there's a check and balance system. And one thing, I think that helps.
No, please continue on. I think that's exactly what we were I was going to talk into is like the longevity plan is really talking about, how do you prepare for the aging population, the process of what's going to, and talking about the longevity plan of how it integrates itself into a holistic way of looking at the bigger picture. Because as you're saying, again, the play on words is beyond the trust. The promise of trust is where we're going into, making sure that you have checks and balances. One of the things that I've been working with my aunt is that set up a system to where you have multiple people that to a balance level of over $500, to where you don't just have one person who has authority, but you have two, one family related and one not. Because, and then if they do repeatedly, why? Where is it at? Whether it's in a bank account, whether it's in a real estate portfolio, and things like that. And there's a bunch of programs out there that are about for, quote, taking care of assets that cost a certain amount to be part of it, and, financial sources and things like that. But a lot of times people feel that, oh, I've got my full facilities, I'm not a problem, I've got family who loves me, will be there. We have to plan for our own recourse of health. I mean, if you think about the possible pandemic that we have with the coronavirus right now, health insurance, how many facilities are going to be there, how much you're going to do with it. And I don't mean to be, put a damper on this, but this is the same reality that you're dealing with the aging population. Who's going to be there for you to take care of you? Is it you or is it someone else? You've got, the old adage is that when you get into an airplane, you've got to put your oxygen mask on first before you help anyone else, because if you don't have oxygen, you're not good to anyone. And I just firmly believe that, it's not greed, it's reality. You've got to take care of your full facilities. It goes back to taking care of your body, which takes care of your mind, which takes care of, you got to take care of your self-sustainable you, which then you can take care of other people. And I just believe that this whole thing plays into it. So if we were to end on a positive note, what are some of the things that how we can prepare? Maybe if you could give me the top three things that you think would be preparing. We have one, which I believe is the double checks on a base limit, we're going to call it, of $500 in a checking account, or access, or double deed signatures, and recording that mandate on a deed inhibitor. What else would you suggest?
I think basically, we talked about having let's say, trustees and things like that, but basically it's developing a check and balance system when it comes to financials before checks are written by, that son, for example, and balance is never seen. And one thing that happened is Liz Lowy was the head of the elder abuse unit at the Manhattan District Attorney. So she was the lead prosecutor in my father's case, my father and a lawyer who was also indicted and convicted case. And Liz had been working for decades in that arena, but then she went private sector, not with some big company, but with this company called EverSafe. And what they provide is view-only access to accounts. It could be your own account, or it could be an older adult's account. Mm-hmm. And having this is really, really important. And kind of coupling it up, but that's certainly in a protective way. But in terms of being really proactive, one organization I refer everybody to is WISER, or Women's Institute for Secure Retirement. And it sounds like what you're up to overlaps in this arena because, you know, it's a secure retirement in terms of planning decades before you need it, hopefully, but it's also protecting and preserving those assets once you have them. And WISER has been really, really good on this, and it really focuses on sort of the unique financial challenges that women face.
You know, it lends me into, so thank you very much for that. It warms me because it's exactly why NAWRB was formed, and hence we led this decade plus into the podcast for Know the Rules, is that the overlapping of information, of leveraging resources, that we all have had our unique stories and plays of where we went and what has happened to us, that if we could take lessons learned from you and everyone else and put them into a swimming pool, and we all can amplify that beauty, like we go to a coral reef of seeing all the beautiful fish. It's really what we're doing here. We're pulling off of the beauty of where we've been, that we can share and grow and help each other. So we're not victimized or lessen the victimization, and help each other be a quality life as we age through our process. So thank you. So for that being said, was WISER, again, that's WISER. It's the Women Institute Secure Retirement. And the other thing is that I really want to amplify is that each person's unique circumstances is going to be your legacy and what you do to help that person go through. And number one is isolation. I have a really not so happy story, but it's a true story. Someone was going in and taking care of, supposedly was the care provider on their parents, their mother, in fact, in bed. And the only way she could get her son to visit, which is the number one thing they have, is isolation, that once they get dumped off into a nursing home, that they never go back and get visited. And the only way that she could get her son to come visit her is that he would come and demand a $10,000 check every time he came to see her. Oh. And so the nurses knew it, but they couldn't do anything about it because the mother didn't want to press charges. She says, if I don't give him the $10,000 check, then he'll never come back and see me. She'd rather pay him the $10,000 to hear whatever excuse he needed to get that $10,000 check, just so she would have someone who she felt loved too, that would come visit her. Whoa,
that's so sad.
It really, really is. And so her rationale was, I'm only gonna live so long, and as much as I know it's wrong, it's at least I have some companion before I exit. Right. So it's really about, people don't understand that I have 4 kids. You have, we all have a life, and we're all busy. And you made a comment to me in the beginning, at some point we still have to take that time to really amplify what they did for us when we were kids, and what they did for us as we went through life, that to give them the same dignity as when we bring a child in is how we exit this world, right? Yeah. So I just believe that in closing, this is so powerful. So I wanted to thank you very much for your time, for your 3 rules, and the tip of the day that I really want to amplify is that that you had come up with. So thank you very much for it. Is really about making sure that we're all together. So the tip that you had submitted is, I'll go ahead and let you say it. Go ahead, and what was the tip of the day that you'd like to add?
I think basically, after all this came and went, I realized that to be complacent about elder justice is to be complicit in elder abuse, and that our silence protects perpetrators, not their victim. Today, victims of this crime may be strangers. Tomorrow, they may be our loved ones, or perhaps in the future, ourselves. Seniors in society deserve more. And basically, as concerned persons practicing upstandership, all of us can speak out and then act.
Thank you. You know, as Socrates said, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. And that's amplifying exactly what you just said, that we all have to stand up, speak out as a principle that we came up with. You have to realize that we all have a voice. We have to be observant. We have to be in the realm of caring, loving, supporting. You know, we this whole thing ties in together in those amplitude. So how do we get a hold of you if someone would like to be a participant and be engaged with you and support your advocacy? What's the best way they can reach you, Philip?
I think the best thing is I've got a website, Beyond Brooke, and it's BEYONDBROOKE.org. And I'm also, the last thing I'd like to pitch is I'm trying to get this act that Senator Collins introduced through Congress, and it's called Stamp Out Elder Abuse Act. And the website's stampoutelderabuse.org. And that's also got contact information. That also has a lot of resources in terms of how, if you need help, you can find help. And guess what? How, if you want to help, you can find places that need help. And the reality is, within the context of our community, the experts and the organizations that can help us also need help. Go and find them now. Don't find them when you need help. Find them proactively. Help them. Get to know them. Cultivate a relationship and a sense of trust. And be forewarned, be forearmed, and toward prevention, and if necessary, response.
I love it. So thank you very much again, Philip. And again, I'm Desiree Patno. I'm your host with Know the Rules of the Game. Today it was for elder financial abuse. The way you get a hold of us is NAWRB.com. Again, these are shared on our website at 8 a.m. every Wednesday. You'll get a new podcast on what the Know the Rules of the Game for. To get a hold of us, again, go to NAWRB.com. We are a full 360 of everything that be around the quality of life that has to deal with land, for which is your real estate ecosystem. The more we know, the more we can help, and the more you know, the more you can help in your sphere of influence. So thank you all again for joining me, and I look forward to seeing and hearing you all again next week at Wednesday at 8 a.m. So thank you again, Philip, and everyone have an incredible day. Thank you again.
Thanks, Desiree.